Hello, and welcome back to It's a Very Exciting Time, a podcast by a UFO nerd and his tolerant friend. My name is Scott, and I've been fascinated by the phenomenon my entire life.
And my name is Chuck. I'm an aerospace nerd and a tolerant friend.
We started this podcast because since 2017, there have been shocking revelations, from news of secret Pentagon programs to confirmed videos of astonishing craft. In a nutshell, now that we know the government has recovered non-human technology.
Or at least we will, now that John Oliver is on the case.
It raises a natural question. If UFOs are real, what else? Suddenly, some of these other parts of the phenomenon that seemed unlikely are pulled into the realm of the possible.
And they may still be unlikely. But even if it's alien craft and not Chinese drones...
Woof! Ooh, it's a very exciting time.
It is. And a quick reminder before we get into it, you can find our show notes at veryexcitingtime.com or support us by going to patreon.com/veryexcitingtime, where you can find extra content like the Q&A that we'll be recording later this week.
Mm-hmm. Oh, man. Chuck, I got
Scott.
A good one for you today.
Yeah?
I had to cut. I had so much material to cover that was obviously not all going to fit. So, we're going to talk about some big stuff this week. We're going to talk about John Oliver did an episode about UFOs on Last Week Tonight. Hey, that's a big deal. We got Chris Mellon news coming out our ears. We got him slamming the AARO historical report. We've got Sean Kirkpatrick leaking a private signal conversation with Mellon via FOIA. It's been wild. We're going to get into all that. But I don't even have time to come back with updates on the Air Force bases swarmed with drones stories. AARO released a report talking about the Elgin Air Force Base UFO thing that Matt Gaetz did. I don't have time to get into that. Sean Kirkpatrick, Chris Mellon released his own set of signal messages with someone who seems to be confirming a historical UFO case, the Kingston, Arizona case. So, expect an episode on that coming up soon. So, it's been a buck wild week. But I picked the ones that I thought were kind of the most important and, frankly, the most fun to talk about.
So here's my question to you. Historically, looking at our episode lists, the episodes that do the best are the ones that include the word Grusch in the title.
True story.
But do you think John Oliver is more popular than Grusch?
Ooh, I think it's certainly broader appeal. Within the target audience for the show, no, not even
probably not. Yeah. Yeah, good call.
Let's talk about John Oliver, man. I don't know about you. I love Last Week Tonight. Thrilled they started uploading it to YouTube. So now that's kind of my weekly ritual as I watch the new episode over lunch. So I was really excited when I saw people on Twitter and Reddit saying, yo, John Oliver just dropped an episode about UFOs. I'm like, this is going to be great.
Yeah, our patrons mentioned it as well, which is pretty exciting.
It is exciting. So for anybody who didn't watch it, it's kind of weird reviewing this because John Oliver is kind of you either already watched John Oliver or you don't. You don't need me to convince you. And if I'm telling you about it, you probably already watch it. But anyway, for anybody who hasn't watched it, it was a totally reasonable, grounded, level-headed introduction to the topic. If you've got friends or family members you think might be open to discussing the topic, this is a great way to kind of introduce them to it. Because his whole kind of take is, I know you think this is a laughable topic, but there's something to it. So let's talk about why UFOs are so controversial. He opens with this great quote. He says, hang on, I have a question for you.
Okay. How does concerning the introducing it to family members and stuff, would you recommend this over the New York Times article?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, so there are kind of there are a few different onboarding paths for people, right? Like if somebody seems like they're very open to the kind of weirdness aspect of it, I love recommending Kelly Chase's The UFO Rabbit Hole. She starts out very grounded and nuts and bolts and gets weird with it. It's great. I love her to death. If you're dealing with someone who has a strong political or kind of government background, the 2017 New York Times article where they reveal that despite the Air Force saying nothing to see here for 50 years, they in fact have been maintaining a black books UFO investigation program. That was big news at the time. And for somebody who's still kind of wondering why are they looking into this, that does a good job of getting into it. The more recent article from last year in the New York Times that introduced, not the New York Times, in the debrief where they introduced David Grusch, also phenomenal. David Grusch gets into the kind of like, they feel wild, but are the much more present day claims of not only are UFOs real and worth investigating, but also they have crashed and we have recovered them. That's kind of the meat of what the community talks about now. John Oliver's piece, I think, is really good for someone who's hesitant about it, but might be willing to come on board through the guise of jokes. Because, of course, John Oliver is very good at taking a heavy topic and peppering it with humor and kind of carrying you along to his conclusion.
Right.
And his conclusion here is basically, this ain't nothing. There's something here. And when the government says there's nothing here, you can't really listen to them on it. Like, that's totally a fair take.
Okay.
So
cool.
He starts out early on with this quote that I loved. He said, "From the very beginning of our modern obsession with UFOs, there has been a belief that our government is keeping something from us, and that mistrust has been well earned. The history of the U.S. government's study of UFOs is one ranging from the unsatisfying to the actively misleading."
Yeah. Okay. So what did he cover?
So for anybody familiar with the topic, it was very surface level. Anybody who's listening to this podcast, frankly, is not going to get a lot from this. He discusses the 2017 New York Times article, and he gets a number of things wrong. Like Annie was having a hard time watching it with me because I'm like, that's not right. He made a very common mistake, which is he conflates the UFO program that Lou Elizondo ran, ATIP, which was a DoD program that investigated military sightings, with OSAP, which was the big budget program that they reported in the same New York Times article that involved the government giving $20 million to Robert Bigelow to go study Skinwalker Ranch and other things. People are understandably skeptical about the more paranormal research that Robert Bigelow was doing and the fact that it went to this weird hotel magnate instead of being like an internal thing. I get it. I don't think it was complete nonsense, but I understand why that puts people off. John Oliver conflated them and used that as a reason to kind of doubt Lou Elizondo. And unfortunately, this is something that's been happening since the New York Times article, which itself muddles those two programs together. He also talked about Roswell and reported the government's latest claims that Roswell was actually the crash of a top secret spy program balloon called Project Mogul. That claim has since been debunked by people in the community who are able to track down every single Mogul flight, and there are none that line up with would have crashed at Roswell.
Oh, interesting.
So, like I said, if you're in the community, this probably isn't the episode for you. It's funny. You should watch it. There's a great running gag about him having lost his pet snake.
What? Okay, now I really
gotta watch. But I think it was really good for introducing new people to it and why is the government's word on this suspect in the first place?
Right. Okay. So, but here's the big question. Did he talk about Grusch?
No, he didn't mention Grusch at all, which is a weird omission at this point.
Right? Yeah, it is.
Grusch is not a new topic anymore.
No.
The vibe I get is they've been working on this episode for a number of years. My understanding is the way that shows like Last Week Tonight work is obviously it's not John Oliver himself doing the research. He's the public face of a news team. And some of those team members will have kind of pet projects that they're trying to get on the show. So I bet someone in the writer's room at Last Week Tonight is a big UFO buff, and they've been working on a script for a few years and updating it and tweaking it. And this was kind of what made it through. David Grusch's claims are a big pill to swallow if you're just trying to get someone to the point of maybe UFOs are real.
Right. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. So they're like, they're focusing really on the super palatable nuts and bolts to begin with.
And they made a really good choice. One of the few witnesses that they talked to was Commander David Fravor, who was one of the pilots of the Nimitz Tic Tac incident. He is an impeccably credible witness, right? And he comes across very well on camera. He's a military witness. I think a lot of people still have this stigma that UFOs are things that like yokels in the country see. And, when you find out like, no, the pilot of a, $100 million jet plane in the middle of a Navy training range saw this weird thing and it was documented on radar. Like, oh, I didn't know this shit was real.
Yeah. I still think they could have done good service by adding in, like, I guess if they already had David Fravor, maybe it wasn't needed, but our good boy deserves some airtime.
Absolutely. Now, the one thing I will say is Oliver is known to revisit topics. So I wouldn't be surprised if next season or the season after that, he does a UFOs part 2. It's like, yo, have you guys heard about this David Grusch guy?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Let's do it.
Now, one of the other things that I really appreciated is he offered almost kind of a disclaimer early on. He said, listen, whether you believe aliens exist or not, when it comes to UFOs, belief doesn't really come into it. Whatever they are, people are seeing them. That poster in Mulder's office in the X-Files, it shouldn't have said, I want to believe. It should have said, believe shmelieve. What the fuck is that thing?
Yeah, it's a good distinction.
Right? Yeah, Leslie Kane and Ralph Blumenthal made the same point back when their big articles dropped. Yeah. They said, what people really mean when they ask you if you believe in UFOs is, do you believe in aliens?
Right. Yeah.
We can and should separate those two questions because regardless of belief, UFOs exist. Even the government admits that now. So asking someone if they believe in UFOs, it's like asking them if they believe in birds,
All right. But Scott, we've talked, that birds aren't real.
Oh, here we go.
It is a documented fact that the federal government exterminated all the birds in the 60s and replaced them with lookalike drones to spy on citizens.
Yeah, everyone knows that.
Why do you think they sit on power lines? It's how they recharge. Why do they poop on cars? It's tracking. Wake up, people. Go to birdsaren'treal.com.
I can't do this again, Chuck. We're just going to move on.
All right. We'll get this.
All right. Let's talk about Chris Mellon. Because our boy, the oldest fan of the show, Chris UFO Daddy Mellon, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, longtime supporter of the podcast. He's had a busy couple of weeks, man. Yeah. The first thing I want to talk about is he published an article called "The Pentagon's New UAP Report is Seriously Flawed."
Oh, yeah. I keep thinking I want to get my popcorn machine, but every time we do a podcast, I actually want to pull over like a vintage popcorn machine. But they're really expensive. And
they are
also,
really expensive.
My office would smell like popcorn all the time. But just imagine right now, I'm like actually pulling over that machine and making popcorn.
It'd be great. Or you could get one of those weird, like, Dune popcorn buckets where you got to reach into the weird orifice to get your popcorn out.
What?
You haven't seen this? Oh my God.
No.
They put out,
okay.
I guess this is a thing. They put out like commemorative popcorn bucket toppers for movies. Oh, and for Dune, they put out one that is a sandworm. So melt the sandworm, and it's got all the, like, I don't know, baleen or teeth or whatever. You got to reach in, and it looks unnervingly like an orifice. It's not great.
Oh no, I thought it was going to be the test.
No, that would have been brilliant. The gum jabbar.
Yeah, the gum jabbar.
No. Anyway, so yeah, back to Chris Mellon. AARO's, so he opens this. He says, AARO's recent report on the history of the U.S. government and UAP was perhaps the worst government report I have ever seen.
Wow.
Adding insult to injury, its findings were uncritically reported by the mainstream press. To help set the record straight, I consulted a group of UAP researchers and historians, and I hope the resulting article will prove helpful to all concerned, including AARO itself.
Oh, shit. You get him, Chris.
Right?
So wait, how big was this article? It sounds like this big.
Is 16,000 words, which, if you're not an author, is around 65 pages if you printed it, which coincidentally is the length of the AARO report itself.
How many pages in the AARO report were just like images?
Well, yeah, there is that. So yeah, he actually has significantly more content. And none of his is like a weird table of cited stuff that's all self-referential. It is scathing, dude. It's such a brutal takedown. I just have a selection of quotes here because otherwise I'd be reading the thing front to back, and that would be too much even for me, which you're all going to think is hilarious after our next segment. But
yeah, right.
First quote: AARO has not complied with statutory orders from Congress for a detailed history of UAP sightings as recorded in U.S. government historical record, instead providing a limited history of flawed U.S. government investigations of UAP.
Interesting. Did he go into like what should have been included?
Yeah, so he goes over the original law, which called for the report, and it mentions things like intelligence community efforts to mislead the public about UFOs, for example. So I think the people that drafted the bill were hoping we would get into, there have been rumors for a long time that the CIA or another intelligence organization embedded people inside of news organizations to either spike or debunk UFO stories.
Right.
But yeah, debunking efforts as a whole. And instead, all he did was report on every UFO report the government has produced, and only talked about the fact that they didn't find anything, even though in many cases that wasn't correct. So he didn't cover everything he was supposed to, and the things he did cover, he covered badly.
Interesting. Okay. Wow.
This new report is itself anomalous for several reasons. First, who ever heard of a government report being submitted months before it was due? Especially
that's what I said.
Right? Especially one so rife with embarrassing errors, in desperate need of additional fact-checking and revision. Was AARO Director Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick rushing to get the report out the door before departing, perhaps to ensure his successor could not revise or reverse some of the report's conclusions?
That is a spicy accusation, and I could totally see it happening.
Right? This is the most error-ridden and unsatisfactory government report I can recall reading during or after decades of government service. We all make mistakes, but this report is an outlier in terms of inaccuracies and errors. Were I reviewing this as a graduate student's thesis, it would receive a failing grade for failing to understand the assignment, sloppy and inadequate research, and flawed interpretation of the data.
That's super harsh. Does he get into like some of the errors and flawed interpretations?
Oh yeah, way too many for me to cover here. Now, I will say, Chuck and I discussed a bunch of the errors in our previous episode about the AARO historical report. So you can go listen to that if you want kind of an overview. But there is a really juicy one that I'll share with you in a minute.
Okay.
But before we get there, he said, one of the other concerns I have about press coverage of this report is the tendency to conflate the UFO topic in general with allegations that the government has recovered off-world technology. The UAP issue is distinct and critically important, regardless of the truth about allegations of recovered extraterrestrial non-human technology. Asking AARO to investigate that allegation was unfortunate, since a subordinate DoD or IC office finding its superiors innocent was never going to satisfy the critics anyway.
Yeah. So, okay, but here's a serious question. Who could investigate that? Like, there are clearance issues. Like, can they even get a neutral third party?
That is a really good question. And yeah, ideally there would be a neutral third party, but you got to imagine, we've talked about the idea that, you know, Kirkpatrick didn't actually have access to some of these programs. A neutral third party presumably would have the same problem. I think it pretty much has to be Congress. I don't think anybody else really has the statutory authority to be able to beat down some of these doors. On paper, at least, Congress should be able to get access to stuff.
Right. Yeah. But I see the point that it'd have to be a different branch of government.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So back to Mellon's quotes. This is the outrageous error that he points out. He says, there are unbelievable statements and insinuations in the AARO report, such as the peculiar claim that the Manhattan Project, which built the first atomic bomb, somehow caused UFO sightings and erroneous UAP reporting, and did so even after it terminated on December 31st, 1946, a date they omit because it would not explain the sightings that began in the modern UAP era of June 1947. This is a bit like saying trailer parks cause tornadoes. Since the Manhattan Project did not launch special aerial vehicles of any kind that could be misidentified as UAP, did the project's buildings fly up in the air and cause sightings and erroneous UAP reporting? This incredible claim is not explained by AARO.
Oh, shit. That's... did we even
He's
catch
not
that?
done, Chuck.
Okay, all right. Tell me more.
Indeed. The truth is precisely the opposite of what AARO suggests. Not only is there no evidence of outside civilians mistaking the Manhattan Project and successor operations for UAP, but we know that the personnel working inside the U.S. nuclear weapons program were citing UAP, reporting them, and thereafter collecting hundreds of their own authentic UAP reports. The Senior Air Force Office of Special Investigations Officer, responsible for Los Alamos Scientific Laboratory, compiled a detailed catalog of 209 recent unknown aerial phenomena sightings and instrument tracking incidents in the Los Alamos area and surrounding regions. He sent the catalog with a classified memo to the agency director on May 25th, 1950, stating that security officials agreed, quote, the frequency of unexplained aerial phenomena in the New Mexico area was such that an organized plan of reporting these observations should be undertaken.
Well, shit. It seems like they should make some sort of office for anomalous reporting.
Right? No, it's really interesting, right? Like, I hadn't heard that. Like,
yeah.
I kind of glossed over the weird thing where he blamed the Manhattan Project. Like, yeah, okay, whatever. But like, Chris does a great job of highlighting, not only is this absurd, it is the opposite of what happened. Those guys who should be in the know were themselves confused in submitting reports. Anyway, Chris's whole article is phenomenal and worth reading, and I have to stop, or I'm just going to spend our entire podcast reading the entire thing out loud.
I mean, we could do that. Like put it up for fun or patron only or something.
All right, patrons, let us know if you want me to do like a live audio book, I guess.
Yeah.
Chris Mellon's retort to the AARO historical report.
I don't think it'd be as sleepy as like the Sleep With Me podcast, but it could be good. Good for a commute.
Well, it depends on how we do it, right? Like you and I tend to be pretty upbeat when we're recording it, but we could do a, could AARO have done this differently? Like getting all ASMR with it.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if I could avoid being excited about it.
No, I certainly couldn't.
Yeah.
All right.
Let's
get to the back half of this podcast with the biggest story of the week. So that's not all the Chris Mellon news this week, like I mentioned. The Black Vault, a site we have mentioned many times, who makes Freedom of Information Act requests about UFO topics, managed to get a document from the DoD outlining AARO's attempts to interview David Grusch.
That's cool. Like they've been kind of back and forth about whether that, whether they've contacted each other or not. So this will be interesting.
Absolutely, right? It's been really frustrating to get that and not really know the truth. This document contains an AARO memo with a timeline of their contact attempts with David Grusch, a bundle of emails between them and Grusch, and, weirdly, screenshots of private signal conversations between former AARO director Sean Kirkpatrick and Chris Mellon.
A question. I mean, I'm sure this is on all of our audience mind, but why would it be over Signal? Does the government not have some other secure messaging facility?
It's a very good question. Lou Elizondo tweeted about this. He said, I wonder, when did the DoD authorize Kirkpatrick to use the Signal app for official U.S. business and correspondence? If Chris Mellon and I had tried that, we would have been crucified while we were in government. And when did they allow personally identifiable information of U.S. citizens to be released, contrary to the Privacy Act of 1974? I guess it's more of the same regarding rules that apply to thee and not to me. And when someone responded saying, Lou, lots of the DoD guys are on there, Lou responded, yeah, but they don't conduct official government business on it. That's a big no-no, unless you're AARO, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he was fired, so maybe. Anyway, so okay, but what do they actually say? Like,
actually, before we do that, I meant to put something in the notes about this.
Yeah.
Off the air the other week, Chuck was talking to me about how sometimes we have talked about Sean Kirkpatrick, and it has felt like the podcast has kind of taken a veer into like complaining. And that's not really supposed to be the vibe of the show, right? It's a very exciting time. Let's talk about the things that excite us. And I took that message to heart, and I try not to bring in stories that are about us complaining about things or being disappointed about things. Let's focus on the exciting stuff that's out there. But good Lord, look, Kirkpatrick does not make it easy. And when you've got a huge story like this, like it would be weird for us not to talk about it. And it is impossible to talk about it without talking about how weird Sean Kirkpatrick comes across in these exchanges.
There has to be some at least minimum amount of popcorn entertainment during every episode, right?
Totally. So I just want to be clear, like, we don't relish talking about Sean Kirkpatrick. We don't relish complaining about him or talking shit about him, but good Lord, the guy just keeps tripping over it. Yeah. Anyway. Let's break this document down into kind of three revelations. First, AARO did reach out to David Grusch.
Okay.
Second, Kirkpatrick was in contact with Christopher Mellon and others about David Grusch. And third, Kirkpatrick was caught off guard by Marco Rubio's claims about whistleblowers. Now, we're going to get into all of those in detail, but up first, let's talk about the fact that AARO did reach out to David Grusch repeatedly, and he considered providing evidence and testimony to them, but ultimately declined due to security concerns.
So, like, okay, yeah. I thought Grusch said that AARO had never contacted him. I know there's been a whole, like, he said, they said thing where they both said they hadn't heard from each other. Like, what?
No, you hit the nail on that. This has been super confusing. And David Grusch has said a number of times, very definitively, AARO has not reached out to me. Kirkpatrick has not reached out to me. Well, this is clearly not true. We have emails between them from January. Like, now, I will say that, like, it looks like some of this stuff happened after his testimony. So maybe at the time he was right. But regardless, you are not wrong in picking up on that, right? Like, Grusch has said this. And the community is kind of on fire about it right now. And the people who don't like Grusch see this as kind of a confirmation that Grusch can't be trusted. If he lied to us about this, what else did he lie about? But the contingent that do like Grusch are pointing out that none of these communications paint AARO in a favorable light. Grusch raises pretty significant security concerns, and they just kind of brush them aside and try to paint him with a brush as if he was unwilling to do anything. Now, Liberation Times actually reported on this back in January, so we have heard.
I just, is it possible that Grusch had to say no, that he hasn't contacted us, because he knows that if he did say that, he would have to reveal that Kirkpatrick was going through an unapproved channel and was trying to not get Kirkpatrick fired.
That is more credit than I'm willing to give them. And the signal communications was happening between him and Chris Mellon. I don't know, man. The whole thing is really weird. But basically, Liberation Times reported on this back in January, and they said Grusch was asked to testify, and he declined due to security concerns. They had a quote from David Grusch, but the reason why this story is significant, even though it's not like new information, is we now have confirmation from AARO's own records that yes, this did happen. They did try to reach out to him, and Grusch did decline for security reasons. It does not explain why Grusch said otherwise. And some people are upset about that.
Okay. So what kind of security concerns did he have?
Basically, he was concerned that he has received classified information that AARO wasn't authorized to receive. Now, this gets very muddy and very complicated. We're going to talk about it a little more in detail when we get to the exchange between Chris Mellon and Sean Kirkpatrick. But basically, AARO believes they are authorized to receive everything. Grusch doesn't believe their assurances that if he comes in and testifies, he's not breaking any of his security oaths. Liberation Times reported, in January 2024, AARO provided Grusch with a memo affirming AARO's mandate to receive and oversee all UAP-related information, regardless of classification. Sure. However, the memo and other emails sent by AARO failed to address Grusch's specific security-related questions made at the direction of his legal representative and former ICIG, Chuck McCullough.
Yeah, so AARO provides a note from I don't know, their boss saying, they're totally allowed. And Grusch's lawyer is like, that's not good enough. You still
and the emails are very blunt, right? Like, Grusch responds to the email. He's like, please address the concerns that are raised in my email of this date. Like, I received your memo. Please answer the questions that I asked. And they just don't.
Please see my earlier email.
Right. Intelligence community sources speaking to Liberation Times state that neither the DoD nor AARO possesses jurisdiction over the intelligence community's controlled access programs, or CAPS, some of which purportedly encompass retrieval and reverse engineering activities concerning non-human materials. One source told Liberation Times that the DoD possesses zero authority to grant AARO access to CAPS, nor would they have the authority to receive testimony and evidence from Grusch relating to such programs. Sources have informed Liberation Times that only the intelligence community's Controlled Access Program Coordination Office, or CAPCO, could grant authorities related to CAPS.
So I'm very confused. Isn't the intelligence community part of the DoD?
That is a great question. Technically, they are separate.
Really?
All of the intelligence community agencies report to the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, the ODNI. Okay. And the ODNI reports directly to the president. So they're parallel structures, both under the executive branch.
Okay. Wait, so that's like CIA and FBI and a bunch of others. Okay.
Mm-hmm. You either have DoD as military and intelligence as spy agencies.
Right. Okay, so Grusch knows stuff from the IC side. But AARO's a DoD program, doesn't have access, despite their note from mom saying that they're totally allowed.
That's Grusch's concern. Yeah, that's exactly right. And to be clear, it's not just Grusch's concern. He's not like an armchair lawyer like, I don't know about this. His lawyer is the former intelligence community inspector general. Like, he's pretty well positioned to have a good clue about what people are allowed to talk about.
Right. Yeah. Like ICIG's like the head honcho legal representative of the intelligence community, right?
Pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Liberation Times keeps going. They say, and that's not the only obstacle AARO would face. The office would also require approval from the CIA. Human-sourced intelligence control system operations, HCSO, would require specific CIA approval separate from DoD SAPCO and intelligence communities CAPCO. Any unauthorized disclosures relating to HCSO programs would be taken very seriously, as it could expose ongoing operations and identities of assets providing the CIA with human intelligence.
Taken very seriously is seems like an overly mild statement.
You're right.
Yeah. It does make me wonder if Grusch is looking at AARO as kind of like a trap. Like, come on, tell us everything. It's cool. And then like suddenly gets thrown in prison for all these security violations.
Yeah, we've set up an absolutely impenetrable maze of legal obligations. And if you don't get every single thing right, we're going to throw you in prison and discredit you as a witness because, hey,
brutal.
You forgot to check the box on Form 3 or, you know, whatever. Yeah. I do not blame Grusch at all for being extraordinarily cautious around this.
And it makes sense why he has the ICIG and ex-ICIG as his lawyer.
Yeah. Liberation Times continues. They really got into like what Grusch's concerns are. Another concern raised by sources, which was not acknowledged by Dr. Kirkpatrick and the OUSDI and S officials in their email exchanges, is that the AARO lack the authority to waive clearances for controlled access programs with dual purposes. In essence, these are programs that have valid, significant, and legal, yet that are valid, significant, and legal, and yet allegedly conceal operations involving materials of non-human intelligence.
Wait, so like, because these programs are inside totally legal programs that aren't about UAP, AARO's like kind of blanket UAP mandate doesn't actually cover that larger program.
That's exactly it. To pick a dumb example, let's say the program is nested inside a secret spy satellite program. The spy satellite program is legal. It's real. Congress knows about it. It's on the books. It's documented. It is extremely secret. And nested within it is a secret UAP reverse engineering program. AARO says, we have this memo that says we're able to receive all UAP related things. But in order to tell them about the UAP related things, he has to tell them about the spy satellite things, which he is not legally allowed to. And Grusch raises exactly that concern in one of the emails. He talks specifically about these dual-purpose programs.
God, okay. I would not have talked to AARO either.
Right?
What were you saying about Chris Mellon's signal messages?
Yeah. So that was Revelation 1, right? That Grusch has real security concerns, and although he considered talking to them, he ultimately declined. Second revelation is we've got these in the document. There are screenshots of conversations between Sean Kirkpatrick and Chris Mellon on Signal. To put it bluntly, Kirkpatrick comes off as a bit petulant, almost harassing in these messages. He repeatedly demands that Mellon force Grusch to contact him, but refuses to provide any contact mechanism. He demands contact information for Grusch's lawyer, which Mellon says, I'm not giving you without permission, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Normally, I try to be a good little make-believe journalist, and I take all these things in, and I try to kind of like condense them, summarize them, bring them down. I'm guilty, perhaps, of over-quoting sometimes, bringing a lot of quotes in because I like reading the actual quotes. But this was impossible. I tried and I tried. And at the end of the day, this whole exchange is buck wild and worth looking at. So I want to try something new.
Okay.
A dramatic reading of the Signal conversation between Sean Kirkpatrick and Chris Mellon on June 13th, 2023, starring Chuck Lauer-Vos as then Director of AARO Sean Kirkpatrick, and Scott Vandehei as former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, Chris Mellon.
I love that you cast me as Kirkpatrick, since I regularly cannot say his name. I will do my best, and I love that you sprung this on me. All right.
That's right. Okay. Get in character, man.
Grusch has made claims that he's contacted us and we've never responded. That is just not true. He's also made claims that we don't have access to investigate his claims. That's also not true. If I recall correctly, you indicated he refused to come talk with us, and you're quoted as suggesting as such. I'd suggest you emphasize the need to come speak with us. You have the contact email.
Hi, Sean. Do you have a specific example of Dave claiming he's contacted AARO and your office refusing to respond? That sounds strange to me, as during a conversation yesterday, he told me AARO was not a lawfully designated recipient of his whistleblower info, hence his reason for not contacting AARO. I also don't recall saying Dave refused to come talk to AARO. I certainly did not do so in the debrief article, or in my article in Politico. And I've done no interviews yet about Dave.
It was on the interview Sunday. The Pentagon is preparing a response. His assertion that we aren't lawfully empowered is clearly incongruous with the law.
Well, I'd be happy to check on that. Contrary to press reports, Dave still retains his attorney, Charles McCullough III, who is a former NSA and ICIG. Chuck would know, if anyone does.
There is a significant misconception between the authorities in question. The Title 50 authorities that we don't have are for CI purposes, not taking in information. The law is very clear about that. If he has concern, he should have his attorney discuss it with the Office of the General Counsel, OGC. We've had many people come share appropriately the information they have from various places. Chuck is wrong if that's his advice.
I'll be happy to raise that with Dave and get back to you.
If nothing else, he needs to contact us and we'll introduce his attorney to OGC.
Okay, I spoke to Dave, and his first question was, why hadn't AARO gotten all the info from the ICIG? It's all there and fully documented to include confirmation of the program is real from active, cleared insiders.
DOJ has to release it since it's part of a criminal investigation. They haven't yet. He needs to come tell us separate from his criminal complaint.
He obviously does not have to do so, and he even said, how do I know Sean is not a target of the ongoing criminal investigation? However, that being said, I explained your request regarding having his attorney contact OGC and suggested he do so to show full cooperation. He said that if you can provide OGC's contact info, he'll pass it to his attorney. By the way, he also said his claim about contacting you dates to a conversation the two of you had many months ago on a Tandberg system, and that you didn't follow up after that call. I'm not trying to adjudicate that issue, just telling you what he said. Apparently, that is what his statement was referring to. So, if you can provide an OGC email or phone number, I'll get that to Dave right away, and hopefully his attorney will promptly contact OGC.
All of that is both absurd and false. I haven't had a conversation with him for years. If he wants this brought out and investigated, then yes, he obviously does have to. His continued refusal to speak with us only hurts his case. I've contacted congressional OGC to reach out to him so they can explain the law. Haven't had a conversation for years. Our statement will simply be that he's refused to speak with AARO.
Okay, sounds good. Happy to help when I can. Don't hesitate to kick my tires if I'm off base with something. By the way, there isn't a congressional OGC as such.
There are congressional lawyers that get law.
Okay, to be clear, whom should Dave expect to hear from if you cannot provide a person of contact at DOD?
Vet law.
Okay, Hill OGC generally advise members only. They advise their employers, not members of the public.
It's either a lawyer at the Hill or a lawyer in DOD. Who am I sending them to? Either the law is law, or we can scrub having anyone else come see AARO.
You can't tell Chuck to go to various committees on the Hill. It needs to be someone who represents AARO in the executive branch. There are a dozen Hill committees with majority and minority counsel who may not even agree.
Depends on how badly people want this sorted. Send me Chuck's contact info.
Not without his permission, obviously. How about I relay your contact info here to Chuck? This will get sorted. Of that, I have no doubt. It's only a matter of how quickly and by whom.
I'm not giving my contact info out. Given the harassment and threats, that's why we have a secure mechanism. This is a reply to an earlier statement. I'm not trying to adjudicate the issue, just telling you what you said. And yes, you are defending and adjudicating, and you're undermining the very organization you purported to help establish for this purpose.
Really? That's odd. I try to bring everyone to AARO that I can. I'm trying to help put Dave in touch with your GC, if you can provide simple contact info. I'm not judging the claims between you and Dave, and have not claimed that his claims are accurate. I've said that he is sincere and credible, and his other claims, which I expressly called allegations, warrant investigation. I have no idea what you or Dave discussed or when, and I'm not taking a position on that. So even if the underlying claim of recovered materials, unfortunately, the screenshot here is clipped. I would love to know what he says in the rest of that paragraph. Dave can now say, Sean has refused to provide me or my attorney the contact info that would allow us to discuss legal concerns that we have with providing testimony to AARO. I am not your enemy, and I'm not saying this to provoke or irritate you. Moreover, having once been in similar jobs, I recognize you have a big pile of work and responsibility on your plate. I only mention this because it seems you must have some legal representation, and assuming they're competent, it seems to me a discussion will help get Dave's testimony into your system. That seems to me it should be a win for all.
I've asked OGC for contact info.
Great.
Waiting to hear back.
I will be happy to provide that to Dave and Chuck if you like. I think you have a fascinating and important job, and I want nothing more than to see the process work. Please don't think I'm out to make your job harder.
Actually, Dave can't say any such thing, since he hasn't asked me for anything. Only you.
Actually, he probably can, and might, but that doesn't matter. I have no specific reason to believe he will, and I'm not proposing that to him. I'm just trying to close the loop and move things towards a good outcome. Thanks.
I like to imagine there was a mic drop at the end there.
Right? Oh my God. You see why I wanted to include the whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah. You were right that that is petulant and aggressive. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, one thing that's not clear from us doing a dramatic live reading is when you look at the screenshot, you can see the timestamps consistently. Kirkpatrick is like firing it off, and Mellon is like leaving him on red for a little while. Like Kirkpatrick's first message, that kind of aggressive one that just kind of comes out of the gate, out of nowhere, he sent that at 10:30 at night, and Mellon didn't respond until 8:30 the next morning.
Right, and when he did respond, it was like, "Hi, Sean."
Hi, Sean. Right? And there are multiple points where Kirkpatrick is like clearly responding instantly, and Mellon like goes to lunch. You know, like you see the last messages at like 11 o'clock, and then Mellon responds to him at like 1:30.
Yeah.
You definitely get the impression that Kirkpatrick is big mad, and Mellon's kind of like, okay, buddy.
Yeah. So, general takeaway, Kirkpatrick trying to get Mellon to tell Grusch to talk to AARO, but Mellon's just like repeating Grusch's legal claims, which Kirkpatrick dismissed.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's really strange, by the way, can I say, to include these screenshots at all in this FOIA request. It came from the DOD. Kirkpatrick doesn't work there anymore, which means Kirkpatrick provided these screenshots to the DOD at some point, which some people have pointed out online is the kind of thing you have to do when there's an ongoing court case and you are required to provide evidence.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very interesting in that regard. I also wonder though if he had to give up his phone before leaving the DOD.
Maybe. Yeah. Now, I will say in one of the screenshots, which are, again, from Kirkpatrick's perspective, you can tell because of which ones are blue and stuff. There's a little note that says, "You have set messages to disappear after a week," which means Kirkpatrick, in the middle of this exchange with Mellon, changed his settings to delete his sent messages.
Wow. That is... Right? Oh, okay. Well, anyways, how did Mellon react to this being put out?
Oh, he's a class act, like always, right? He says, "To my surprise, parts of a conversation I had with Dr. Kirkpatrick on Signal were recently made public via a FOIA request. These messages simply relate to my effort to facilitate a meeting between AARO and Dave Grusch at Dr. Kirkpatrick's request. I don't give out people's contact info without their consent, but I told Sean I would be happy to convey his request to Dave. My recollection is that Dave was going to consult his attorney and proceed from there. Dave has an excellent attorney, so if he was advised by counsel not to meet with AARO or others, I certainly don't blame him. I was not in a position to judge the legal arguments and issues involving conflicting ICIG, DOJ, and AARO jurisdictions and claims. I was simply trying to facilitate communications in the hopes of helping the congressionally mandated investigation."
Yeah, that's amazing. I fear sometimes, like, what would happen if, like, I never talk about interesting things, but like, what would happen if someone trolled through all of my message history? I'm sure that there's something that could be taken out of context, and for him,
this motherfucker buys a lot of keyboards.
Yeah, exactly. What is his deal with keyboards? Yeah. So like that's still a fear, and I can imagine when he was told that like his Signal conversations were being put out, it's like, whew, but beautiful that it turned out like, that's fine.
God. Well, and it just goes to show that Mellon has played the game a lot longer than Kirkpatrick has. All of his communications are calm, professional, mediating, like
Yep. Totally. Well, so what was this was the second thing. What was the third thing you mentioned?
Yeah. So this was the interesting one, because I kind of read this in a hurry and I went, okay, yeah, AARO tried to contact Grusch and he didn't want to. That's weird. And then I read a lot of articles talking about like Grusch's security concerns. It kind of beats you over the head with it. Like, oh, like these were real heavy duty security concerns. It's not just, I don't believe you. It's like, this is a mess, and your single memo assuring me that you're good, I don't trust it. No. And then, there's the obvious drama of Sean's leaked conversation with Mellon.
Mm-hmm.
But there is another one that kind of flew under my radar. And it wasn't until I read someone else talking about it that I realized, like, oh, this is almost a bigger story. In the document are screenshots of other signal conversations between Grusch and someone whose name has been redacted concerning a comment that Senator Marco Rubio made in July about UAP whistleblowers with high clearances.
Okay. Remind me what Rubio said?
Right. So Rubio said, there are people that have come forward to share information with our committee over the last couple of years. I find most of these people, at some point, maybe even currently, have held very high clearances and positions within our government. So you start to ask yourself, what incentive would so many people with that kind of qualification, and these are serious people, have to come forward and make something up?
Yeah.
Now, Liberation Times reported these whistleblowers are first-hand witnesses of legacy UAP programs and chose not to approach AARO because they shared similar security concerns as Grusch.
Yeah, totally. So what did Kirkpatrick say about it, though?
Yeah, so I'm not going to make you read this one out with me, but okay. Kirkpatrick messages this individual who, through contextual clues, seems to be either a member of Congress or a congressional staffer. That's purely inference, but there are some clues there. But yeah, Kirkpatrick is having a conversation with this guy, and then all of a sudden he says, hey, what is Rubio talking about? And this person responds, said, he's referring to previous witnesses that provided testimony regarding the crash retrieval program. Those witnesses will not go to AARO. They were asked to. And Kirkpatrick says, do we have notes from their testimony? Are there program names, owners, anything I can verify? And the guy responds, I'll talk to leadership and get back to you. To which Kirkpatrick responds with this brutal paragraph. He's like, the agreement, as I recall, was that if someone came to you all, we would be invited to participate so I can document and investigate. That hasn't happened. Yet I've had you all over to participate. As it stands, Congress is not enabling us to actually do the job set in law for us to do and is withholding information from the office Congress set up. Raises a lot of questions. And the person responds, and this is the last line of the screenshot, since you started interviewing, we've had no one we didn't send your way. So that's just not true.
Yeah.
So it's not just Mellon that Kirkpatrick gets all head up with. He's definitely just kind of a firebrand at all times.
God, we need to take his Signal account away.
Right? Now, here's the thing. So I read that exchange. I thought it was a little funny. I didn't think much of it. Liberation Times picked up on what I didn't. They said, this admission revealing Dr. Kirkpatrick's lack of awareness regarding these whistleblowers highlights a significant gap in AARO's understanding. It underscores that AARO was and continues to operate with limited comprehension of the core allegations and evidence. These were not only presented to the intelligence community's Inspector General, but also to senators whose staff possess investigative authority.
Yeah. So despite AARO's historical review stating clearly that there's nothing to this and none of these programs exist, here's a clear sign that Kirkpatrick was caught flat-footed, has no idea who these people are or what programs they're involved with.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, we knew this, right? We've talked for a while now that we knew there were witnesses who had gone to Congress who were unwilling or reluctant to go to AARO. That's been in the wind for a while now, but I hadn't really put two and two together and combined that fact with AARO's historical report and Kirkpatrick's continued assistance that they know everything. Now, one of the threads that we're not talking about this week, but we probably will in a future episode, is AARO's historical report confirmed a potential UFO program called Kona Blue, which is a whole big thing and we'll get into later. But in a nutshell, Kona Blue is related to the Robert Bigelow, Lou Elizondo crowd. And Kirkpatrick has been very clear that his belief is that that crowd James Lukatsky and Lou Elizondo and Chris Mellon and these others are basically a handful of loud people who are misleading the government into believing there's something here and there isn't. And he loves to kind of conflate everything down and say, see, it was all those dudes.
Yeah.
And he's speaking from a position of authority, saying, we interviewed all of the witnesses, and every single one of them were referring to this bullshit Kona Blue program. None of them were referring to real things. And we know that because we have access to everything. Well, here we are. We know that Kirkpatrick did not have access to anything. There are many whistleblowers who went directly to Congress and didn't trust AARO. So it calls into question the entire premise of the historical reports. There's nothing to see here conclusion. There's a guy on UFO Twitter named Mike Colangelo who summed it up really well. He put it like this. Kirkpatrick said, we've had great cooperation and we have access to anything we need. But AARO couldn't get access to any information about David Grusch's allegations from the ICIG because of the criminal complaint. According to Sean Kirkpatrick in the text messages, the info was part of a criminal investigation and the DOJ had to release it first. So AARO hit a brick wall. They couldn't get access to any David Grusch info from the ICIG, which seems like info they would definitely need to properly investigate Grusch's allegations.
Yeah, right. And they did say that they looked into all of it. But here's Kirkpatrick saying, like, hey, did you take any notes?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, the whole thing is really weird. Basically, Black Vault, who is a complicated guy in the community, who is mildly antagonistic to Lou Elizondo and all of Lou Elizondo's related claims, starts submitting FOIA requests to try to get to the bottom of whether or not AARO talked to David Grusch, right? Kirkpatrick says one thing, Grusch says another. Well, let's get FOIA requests and find out. He gets back a info dump that says very clearly AARO tried to contact Grusch. Okay, looks bad for Grusch. He puts it out, doesn't think much about it. Except once we start digging into the document, while yes, there is still this weird thing of Grusch said nobody tried to contact me, and that turns out not to be true, and maybe someone will straighten that up. Everything else in here makes AARO look pretty bad, like Kirkpatrick's petulant, harassing behavior, demanding that people contact him, but not giving any contact info, harassing congressional members and saying, why aren't you giving me info? And they're like, did. Him saying we have all the information we need, but then obviously not having access to Marco Rubio's claims. It all adds up to a picture that doesn't look great for AARO, and more specifically, Sean Kirkpatrick. Now, Lou Elizondo put out a quote saying something along the lines of, Kirkpatrick has shown his true colors, and, those of us who've worked with him kind of knew, and, and Elizondo did something I really appreciated, which he said, I want to be clear. There are people working at AARO who are good people, who I've known in the community, who are here trying to do a good job. I feel badly for them that they took this job expecting to do good work. And this is the guy that was leading them. But it kind of goes back to Chris Mellon's question, right? Like, did he rush this report out so he could put his conclusions on it and not let his successor change them to something that is frankly a little more reasonable? I don't know.
Right.
And like we said earlier, we don't want to spend the whole show bad-mouthing Kirkpatrick and talking about how shitty he is. But I think it's really important to note that this story really calls into question whether AARO has the access that they need to make any sort of definitive statements.
Right. Yeah. I still think I'm always one to believe Hanlon's razor, that never attribute to malice that which can be attributed to stupidity or incompetence. And I can imagine that this might not even be incompetence. It could just be that Sean's boss told him, get this report out now. I don't care how many errors it has.
Yeah.
It just needs to be out because his boss knew that there wouldn't be a new director for a while.
It's true. And we early on tried to give Kirkpatrick a little more credit than I think we have recently. Early on, we tried to be clear about Kirkpatrick seems to be caught between a rock and a hard place. His bosses, historically, based on their actions, we can say are not in favor of disclosure.
Right.
And yet he's been hired by Congress, who are being very clear. Your job is disclosure. That's an uncomfortable position. So, like you said, maybe we don't need to throw Kirkpatrick completely under the bus. Maybe this isn't all him. He was put in an impossible position. These text messages sure don't make him sound like a pleasant person to interact with, but,
He sounds stressed out. I know that I've written you messages like that before. But I like to think I'm quite pleasant. So I don't know. Like, I think I would be. He sounds out of water.
Sure.
Like he's not quite at the level he needs to be to do this job, and it's coming out very poorly, which is too bad.
I appreciate your efforts to reach for grace, Chuck.
Only because I know what this looks like.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on It's a Very Exciting Time. You can find show notes and more on our website, veryexcitingtime.com, as well as links to our social media accounts.
And you can email us at scott.or.chuck@veryexcitingtime.com. And if you'd like to support the show, please check out our Patreon at patreon.com/veryexcitingtime.
And Chuck, as always, my wife thanks you for listening to me talk about UFOs so she doesn't have to.